But the fact is that using whether it's people different from me, nationalism, populism, is a very dangerous threat to democracy, not just in America, where we're seeing it play out, but in the whole world. In the context of a fight between democracy and autocracy, not mine, but the version of populism, ethno-nationalist populism, which tries to bring down education and fake news, the media, which is a protector of democracy, that version is contributing in countries other than our country and is a danger to democracy. We think democracy is on the ballot in America. It's a victory that we must win, because it will only make matters worse if they have another stay at what they're doing to the courts in our country, the fear that they're instilling in jurists in our country, the suppression of the vote in our country, the role of their big, dark, rich, billionaire donors who don't want to pay taxes, suffocating the airways from the fossil fuel industry and the gun industry and the rest of that. So money and populism, sadly, have gone together with this ethno-nationalist, what they call elite, which we call education, free press, and the rest. So I urge you to think in terms of the word. It says it's a threat. You're going to deny that it's a threat to democracy in the versions that have emerged in America so clearly? And why does everybody here say to me, what happens if he gets elected? Well, you can't let that happen, because for us, this election is Washington crossing the Delaware.
A few moments later.
You may be thinking now that Trump is a populist. You are right. He didn't accept the 2020 elections, and he should have. So should Hillary in 2016, so should Brussels, and so should Westminster in 2016, and so too should Congresswoman Pelosi, instead of saying the 2016 election was, quote, hijacked. Quote, hijacked.
Thank you. All right, guys, so we got to talk about this pretty amazing video going viral of Nancy Pelosi getting absolutely destroyed to her face, getting called out on the Democrats and their hypocrisy when it comes to this whole democracy conversation, which really is just about the Democrats and their power, right? Their authoritarianism, their fascism, and the fact that Nancy Pelosi is upset with the uprising against the Democrats and their fascism, okay? And this is what has led to the smearing of populism, which deals with the politics of the people, right? When you take a political approach that tries to adhere to the concerns of ordinary people while disregarding the elites. Now, populism is a term that can be used to describe politicians on the left and the right. Now, the left will disagree with this. They'll say there are no populists on the right, but that's just not true, because there are different forms of populism. It's not just economic populism. You also have political and cultural populism. Now, in my opinion, I think that on the right, you have people like President Trump, who has been described as a populist because he's more of a cultural populist. And there's also some economic populism as well, too, when it comes to policies dealing with fair trade. However, cultural populism deals more with issues like nationalism and immigration, for example. But on the left, they deal more with economic populism. And that's why people like Bernie Sanders are referred to as, again, populist on the left. And I'm not a huge fan of economic populism, because economic populism tends to lead to socialism, right? That they seem to kind of be the same thing, right? I mean, the economic populism in Latin America basically led to socialism and inflation, massive inflation, in the collapse of economies, right? Because there was too much government spending due to out of control fiscal and monetary policies, okay? And again, this tends to lead to a disaster economically, okay, when you, again, adopt these kind of socialist economic policies that the economic populists on the left tend to want to push on society, right? They want more government control because they think that that's good for the people, when ultimately it's not, okay? I think capitalism at the end of the day, yes, it creates inequality, but inequality is good because it brings everybody up, even if, relatively speaking, there is a gap between the wealth of the rich and the poor. The poor are a lot better off under capitalism than they are under socialism and communism, right? So again, I am a fan of some things when it comes to economic populism, like being against crony capitalism, and I'm also not a fan of big money in politics, because I know that sometimes the interests of big corporate America or big corporations is not the same as the people. And sometimes, big corporations will their power, particularly when they have, monopoly power, to stifle the will of the people. Okay. When you look at the big tech monopoly and how they essentially wielded their power to censor free speech during the pandemic, this is what I am talking about. Right. So, there's some things that I do agree with when it comes to the economic populace, but the wealth redistribution policies that they adhere to, not a huge fan of that. But with that being said, again, this video is not really about populism, the ins and out populism. It's really about this viral video of this musician named Winston Marshall, who is going to school Nancy Pelosi on populism and this idea that populism is a threat to democracy, which is hilarious because, again, populism is concerned more with the ordinary people. So you would think that populism would kind of be synonymous with democracy, right? So to speak, right? But according to Nancy Pelosi, no. Populism is a threat to democracy because apparently democracy is about what the elites like Nancy Pelosi wants and not about what the ordinary people want, which tells you everything you need to know about the Democrat Party. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Ladies and gentlemen, words have a tendency to change meaning. When I was a boy, woman meant someone who didn't have a... Populism has become a word used synonymously with racist. We've heard ethno-nationalist, with bigot, with hillbilly, redneck, with deplorables. Elites use it to show their contempt for ordinary people. This is a recent change. Not long ago, Barack Obama, while still president at the North America's Leaders Summit in June 2016, he took umbrage with the notion that Trump be called a populist. How could Trump be called a populist? He doesn't care about working people. If anything, Obama argued, he was the populist. If anything, Obama argued, Bernie was the populist. It was Bernie who'd spent 5 decades fighting for working people. But Trump... Something curious happens. If you watch Obama's speeches after that point, more and more recently, he uses the word populist interchangeably with strongman, with authoritarian. The word changes meaning. It becomes a negative, a pejorative, a slur. To me, populism is not a dirty word. Since the 2008 crash, and specifically the $1 trillion Wall Street bailout, we are in the populist age.
Yeah, because again, even people on the right, okay, that are traditionally more libertarian minded, more supply side minded when it comes to economic policies, realize that, hey, when we let these big corporations engage in crony capitalism, which is what led to the economic crash of 2008, that hurts ordinary people. Okay. So this is why you're seeing kind of a rise in populism, okay, especially against the elites, okay, the big financial institutions, because again, they don't always act in the best interest of the people. And when they end up engaging in, again, crony capitalism and crashing our economy, that hurts ordinary people, right? So, when he talks about Obama essentially trying to say that, well, Bernie's the real populist, what he means is that, well, Bernie's an economic populist, okay? And when he tries to smear Trump as a strongman, well, what he's upset about is the fact that Trump is what we call a cultural populist, in the sense that he tries to appeal to religious traditionalism, law and order, sovereignty, and being not so much for unfettered immigration, right? Trying to protect the ethnic and cultural makeup of a nation, okay? The values and culture that a country was founded on. Again, that is kind of what defines cultural populism, okay? And again, that is what Trump is, okay? He is a cultural populist, and this type of populism has been characterized as racist according to the left, right? So when people like Nancy Pelosi speak against populism, what they're really actually talking about is cultural populism, because a lot of these Democrats are economic populists in the sense that, again, they will try to push these far left economic policies, like more government control over healthcare and things like that. The same type of economic populism that Bernie Sanders adheres to, that I personally don't think is good for the people in the long run. But again, this is what they're talking about, okay? I just want people to understand.
And for good reason. The elites have failed. Let me address some common fallacies, some of which have been made tonight. If the motion was that demagoguery was a threat to democracy, I would be on that side of the House. If the motion was that political violence was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. January 6th has been mentioned. A dark day for America indeed. And I'm sure Congresswoman Pelosi will agree that the entire month of June 2020, when the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon was under siege and under insurrection by radical progressives, those too were dark days for America. Yes?
There is no equivalence of it. So that, yes.
So you don't agree? And it's fine, you don't agree, that's fine.
But it is not like what happened on January 6th, which was an insurrection incited by the President of the United States.
So you don't agree?
Yeah, so again, this is the hypocrisy, right? These people that want to talk about the threat of political violence and authoritarianism, again, they were totally fine with that and totally okay with it when the left does that, right? And the political violence that happens as a result of what the left is pushing to their side of the aisle, right? And Nancy Pelosi, instead of acknowledging that, hey, this is wrong, she wants to just say, well, it's not the same thing. There is no equivalence. Well, actually, I do agree with Nancy Pelosi, but not for the same reasons. I actually think that what happened during the Summer of Love was actually much worse than what happened on January 6th. In fact, I would say that there were many January 6s that happened before January 6th. Again, it was the Antifa riots. It was the BLM riots. Yeah, those things were much worse than what happened on January 6th, okay? So I actually might agree with Pelosi, but for different reasons, okay? Because I believe that the left-wing violence is much worse than what happened on January 6th. January 6th was one day. But again, we had multiple January 6s before January 6th.
But you'll condemn those days. My point, though, is that all political movements are susceptible to violence and indeed insurrection. And if we were arguing that fascism was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. Indeed, the current populist age is a movement against fascism. I've got quite a lot to get through. Populism, as you know, is the politics of the ordinary people against an elite. Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy. And why else have universal suffrage if not to keep elites in check? Ladies and gentlemen, given the success of Trump, and more recently Javier Milei taking a chainsaw to the state behemoth of Argentina's bureaucratic monster, you'd be mistaken for thinking this was a right-wing populist age. But that would be ignoring Occupy Wall Street. That would be ignoring Jeremy Corbyn's for the many, not the few. That would be ignoring Bernie against the billionaires, RFK Jr. against Big Pharma, and more recently, George Galloway against his better judgment. Now, all of them, including Galloway, recognize genuine concerns of ordinary people being otherwise ignored by the establishment. I'm actually rather surprised that our esteemed opposition, Congressman Pelosi, is on that side of the motion. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-elite. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-establishment.
Well, again, they have positioned themselves that way historically. However, fast forward to today in 2024, these people are on board with the establishment, okay? Because the establishment has adopted woke ideology in order to push their agenda, okay? So again, they have essentially weaponized wokeness in order to get a lot of these individuals on board with what they want to do. Like, for example, when it comes to what happened during the pandemic, okay, in the vaccines, getting people to wear masks and things like that. Well, they tried to associate people who didn't want to wear masks or had questions about the vaccine as, well, you're racist, okay? You must hate black people and Hispanics and all types of stuff when it comes to, again, illegal immigration. Well, if you don't get on board with our agenda, then you must be a racist, okay, or a xenophobe, or you hate Latinos. Again, this is what they do, right? So the left, because of how Democrats have weaponized wokeness, right? Even some of the more staunch kind of progressives that are anti-establishment, they have now gotten on board with the establishment agenda, right? They have become establishment because of being convinced that, hey, the establishment agenda is in the best interest of the victimhood coalition, okay? They have basically weaponized these historical disparities and discrimination and things like that in order to push policies that are pro-establishment, but yet they frame them in ways that, again, are supposed to help solve for these historical, cases of discrimination and, inequalities that the far left is so obsessed with, right? And this is, again, something that has been weaponized by the Democrat Party. And it's very interesting to see how our politics is evolving, right? The quote-unquote anti-establishment left has now become very establishment.
Today, particularly in America, the globalist left have become the establishment. I suppose for Ms. Pelosi to have taken this side of the motion, she'd be arguing herself out of a job. But it's here in Britain where right and left populists united for the supreme act of democracy, Brexit. Polls have showed the number one reason people voted for Brexit was sovereignty, for more democracy.
Points of information.
Thank you.
And here in the United States, I would say that movements like, for example, to get money out of politics or to have term limits are things that populists on the left and the right agree with, okay? Because essentially, it seems as if these politicians not having any term limits have subverted our republic, okay, and the will of the people. And again, this is why you see when it comes to, populists on the left and the right, there is some agreement on some things, okay? And I kind of wish in Congress the so-called populists came together more to push certain agendas that they agree with, like implementing term limits for our elected officials.
What was the response of the Brussels elite? They did everything in their power to undermine the democratic will of the British people. And the Westminster elite were just as disgraceful. As we've heard, David Cameron called the voters fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists. The Liberal Democrats did everything they could to overturn a democratic vote. Keir Starmer campaigned for a second referendum. Elites would have had us voting and voting and voting until we voted their way. Indeed, that's what happened in Ireland and in Denmark. Let's look at some of the other populist movements. The Hong Konger populist revolt is literally called the pro-democracy movement. The farmer revolts from Netherlands to Germany, France, Greece to Sri Lanka. Farmers are taking their tractors to the road to protest ESG policy that's floated down to us from those all-knowing, infallible elites of Davos. The trucker movement in Canada became anti-elitist when petty tyrant Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze their bank accounts, not the behavior of a democratic head of state. The Gilets jaunes in France, ULEZ in London, working people protesting policy that hurt them. And how are they treated? They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called far right by the mayor as well.
Yeah, again, similar tactics used in the United States by Democrats, the elite party, right? And some Republicans are a part of it as well, too. But for the most part, Democrats really abuse this tactic of smearing anybody that they disagree with as a racist, right? Or some kind of bigot. Again, this is a tactic that is utilized by the globalist left. As you can see, this guy points out multiple examples of this.
Ladies and gentlemen, populism is the voice of the voiceless. The real threat to democracy is from the elites. Now, don't get me wrong. We need elites. If President Biden has shown us anything, we need someone to run the countries. When the president has severe dementia, it's not just America that crumbles, the whole world burns. But let's examine the elites. European corporations spend over 1 billion euros a year lobbying Brussels. US corporations spend over $2 billion a year lobbying in DC. 2/3 of Congress receive funding from pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer alone spent $11 million in 2021. They made over $10 billion in profit.
And why do you guys think that these politicians went out here and promoted this vaccine that, hey, it seems as if Pfizer may have not been 100% completely honest about when it comes to the effectiveness of it, right? Well, because they got paid to do so, right? They didn't care. They just took the money from Big Pharma and then they marketed this product and then look what happened, right? As a result, okay? Pfizer got rich. And you got a whole lot of people like Chris Cuomo that have regret, okay, for going along with the agenda, okay? So again, this is why I talk about how money in politics is such a big problem, because our politicians have been bought and sold. They've been bought and sold by big corporations, and they've been bought and sold by foreign countries. And you can see that Congress tends to not act in the will of the people, because if they did, the border would be closed, right? But yet, you know, they're focused on closing other countries' borders and protecting their borders, whether that be Ukraine or Israel, because they've been bought, okay, by the military-industrial complex and lobbies for foreign countries to make sure that they prioritize those things over the will of the people. This is why money in politics is a huge problem.
No wonder then that 66% of Americans think the economy is rigged against them for the rich and the powerful. And by the way, we used to have a word for when big business and big government were in cahoots. And I think any students here of early 20th century Italian history know what I'm talking about. What about big tech? Throughout the pandemic, Biden's team, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security colluded with big tech in censoring dissenting voices, not kooky conspiracy theorists. People like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the Stanford epidemiologist. People like Harvard scientist Martin Kulldorff. People spreading true information, not misinformation, true information at odds with the government narrative. Need I remind you, democracy without free speech is not democracy. This was a direct breach, by the way, of the First Amendment. Before COVID, intelligence services colluded with big tech to have Trump suspended off Twitter. Yes, the same platform which hosted the Taliban and Ayatollah deaf to Israel Khomeini, they thought the president crossed the line when he tweeted on Jan 6th, quote, "Remain peaceful, no violence, respect the law and our great men and women in blue." That's a quote. You may be thinking now that Trump is a populist. You are right. He didn't accept the 2020 elections, and he should have. So should Hillary in 2016, so should Brussels, and so should Westminster in 2016, and so too should Congresswoman Pelosi, instead of saying the 2016 election was, quote, hijacked. Quote, hijacked.
Here she go.
Thank you.
Here she go. It's okay for Pelosi to deny elections, right? It's okay for Democrats to be election deniers, right? But for Trump to do it, though, oh, that's a threat to democracy. When Democrats do it, though, oh, well, we're trying to protect democracy, okay? It's just amazing how that works. The hypocrisy is just stunning. It really is. Well, no, you didn't accept the results of it because you kept saying that Trump is an illegitimate president. When you say that he's an illegitimate president, that means that you don't accept the results. You did not accept the results, and you tried to spend millions of dollars. Actually, you did spend millions of dollars investigating the president as a result of you not accepting it. And you also tried to impeach the guy, right? Again, as a part of that as well, too. They didn't impeach him for that, but that's what they were trying to do. They eventually ended up impeaching him for something that was very frivolous, the Ukraine phone call that, again, was a part of this witch hunt to go after Trump that started with the whole Russia collusion hoax, okay? I mean, these people tried to overthrow our republic. This is what they're trying to do, okay? And they're still trying to do so with the political persecutions of Trump. And they won't accept the outcome of the 2024 election if/when Trump wins.
What about the mainstream media? Let me read you some mainstream media headlines. The New Yorker, the day before the 2016 election. The case against democracy. The Washington Post, the day after the election. The problem with our government is democracy. The LA Times, June 2017. The British election is a reminder of the perils of too much democracy.
Amazing. This is exactly what I tell you guys about. Democracy doesn't actually really mean democracy to Democrats. It actually means democracy TM, right? Anything that's a threat to our power, right? So all of a sudden, when democracy doesn't go their way, oh, democracy is a bad thing, right? It's a terrible thing when it doesn't go their way, okay? Again, it's just so amazing. The hypocrisy is stunning. This is brilliant, right? This is absolutely brilliant. I love this.
Vox, June 2017. The two eminent political scientists say the problem with democracy is voters. New York Times, June 2017. The problem with participatory democracy is the participants. Mainstream media elites are part of a class who don't just disdain populism, they disdain the people.
Facts.
If the Democrats had put half their energy into delivering for the people, Trump wouldn't even have a chance in 2024. He shouldn't have a chance. You've had power for 4 years. From the fabricated Steele dossier to trying to take him off the ballot in both Maine and Colorado, the Democrats are the anti-Democrat party. All we need now is the Republicans to come out as the pro-monarchist party. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is not a threat to democracy, but I'll tell you what is. It's elites ordering social media to censor political opponents. It's police shutting down dissenters, be it anti-monarchists in this country or gender-critical voices here, or last week in Brussels, the National Conservative movement. I'll tell you what is a threat to democracy. It's Brussels, DC, Westminster, the mainstream media, big tech, big pharma, corporate collusion, and the Davos cronies. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off ordinary people as deplorable. The threat to democracy comes from those who smear working people as racists. The threat to democracy comes from those who write off working people as populists. And I'll say one last thing. This populist age can be brought to an end at the snap of a finger. All that needs to be done is for elites to start listening to, respecting, and, God forbid, working for ordinary people. Thank you.
Hey, that was pretty good. At the very least, he basically called out the Democrats and their hypocrisy to Nancy Pelosi's face. Okay, the Democrat Party is definitely the party of anti-democracy. Okay, they hate democracy, right? And they have weaponized that term to basically become synonymous with their agenda, right? Even though, again, their agenda is anti-democratic. It's just so funny how that works. But anyways, let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.